Welcome to Moving Panels, Ignite the Mic. From Gotham's alleys to galaxy's fall, we dive in deep, we set the bar. Debates and takes, we bring the heat. Pull up a chair, join a seat. Moving Panels, where fandom takes flight. We review, discuss, and shed the light. Heroes, villains, every epic night. This is your show, your fandom's might.
Welcome to this Moving Panels One Shot. Let's have a nerdy little conversation. And today we are talking about superhero origins. Have you ever noticed how almost every superhero origin story almost starts off with the worst day of someone's life? Dead parent, a freak accident, a science experiment gone wrong, alien baby sent away because this planet is exploding. Basically, superheroes are born from trauma, and then they have to save the world on top of all of that. But we are going to talk about the evolution of superhero origin stories, how it started, how Hollywood has adapted it, and how the stories have changed as, obviously, audiences have changed throughout the years. And joining me today is someone that, while I won't be putting words in his mouth, I will be throwing some big questions his way as we discuss this, but I thought nobody fitter for this than the literary mastermind himself, Justin Baker.
Thank you for having me. I don't know if I would... Mastermind might be... That sounds like a villain name, so wonder what his origin story was. Never got around to watching that movie.
He's a Batman villain. You know he'd be a Batman villain, though. Yeah. All right, well, let's start at the beginning. Early superhero stories. So we're talking about the late 1930s into the 60s, that gold and silver age of comics, where they were just simple, yet they were efficient. They were, I mean, we know Superman. He's sent from his dying planet. He's raised to be good by the Kents. We got Batman, that his parents are murdered in an alley, and so he vows revenge or justice. It's really revenge, though. Then we got Wonder Woman, who is born of of a mythical realm, and she's raised with a purpose to be a warrior. Captain America, who's just a good man, who is then powered by science. And at this point, Marvel's not really around. We'll get to Marvel a little bit later. Okay. Captain America, of course, being a part of Timely Comics at the time, and DC more being a thing. I mean, you've got, go back before Superman, you got the Phantom, who's essentially Batman, in essence. He's just a guy who relies on mythical stories to hype him up, and he just has a purple suit that he wears. But honestly, when you put all of these together, the origins did three main things. They explained where their powers came from. They established that hero's code, like their moral code, their ethical code. And they gave the hero a reason for doing what they do.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So these stories were typically told once and then rarely revisited. Like, you had to go back and look at the very first story to know how they were... what their origin was, and that was it.
Unless it's a Batman movie.
Well, but we're talking again about the original comics, so this would be the original Detective Comics, everything. This is when a much simpler time. So do you think that the simplicity of the early origins is one of the reasons why these characters, and again, I mentioned Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Captain America, we can throw a few others in there, but do you think the simplicity of their origins is part of why they still endure as comic book characters?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely don't want the origin story to be too convoluted, have too many parts. You want to keep it simple. And, bad things happen to good people, like you're talking about the code that they have. You just really want to hit those three. And most people, honestly, I don't care too much about the origin story. I like seeing kind of after the powers, or what do they do in different circumstances when they have the villain on the ropes. So for me, origin story, I can, take it with a grain of salt. That kind of suspension of disbelief a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that. But I do think the origin kind of establishes some of that. Of course, it's hard talking about this here in, 2025. We're talking about these origin stories in which the ones we're talking about right now have existed for, 80 years and have been adapted, and they're again, like we're talking about, there's been an evolution of these origin stories. But yeah, you go back, because I don't know if you know this, if you go back to Action Comics #1, where Superman first came from, if you read about the origin, they didn't have the whole aspect of it's the yellow sun that gives Superman his powers. They go ahead and say that all Kryptonians, even on Krypton,
Were super
had these abilities.
Okay.
Yeah, they were all, and they could, of course, leap. He couldn't fly until much later, and they had the super strength and all that. So
that is a good and bad thing with the superhero origin, is since it is the first part that you're usually telling, you can always go back and tweak it. You can revamp it if you need to in a later issue.
I will say, though, I don't think Batman's has ever really changed. I know they've done things where they try to change, like, of course, in the Batman '89 movie, they made it so it's the Joker who was the one that killed his parents, and they've done some twists on that, but essentially it's always the same.
There's not a lot of...
come out of the...
Not a big change in his origin story from generation to generation.
Yeah. But then we get into the 1960s, and this is where Marvel comes along, and they say, what, playing off of what you're saying, Marvel comes in and says, but what if the origin story is the whole point of the character? Spider-Man, yes, he gets his powers by being bit by a radioactive spider, but that's not what makes him Spider-Man. What makes him Spider-Man is him failing at using his ability.
Yeah, can't save Uncle Ben.
Yeah, it causes the death of Uncle Ben, and then he has to live with that guilt. So it's kind of a twist on the Batman story a little bit. It's not because of the death that he becomes the hero. He is already the superhuman, and then because the way he's choosing to use his powers, it ultimately causes the death of Uncle Ben, which, again, with great power comes great responsibility line, which I know a lot of people think is from the movie. It's not. It's from the comic.
And giving it a little bit of an ELA spin, I'm sure you probably remember, middle school, elementary, writing papers, and maybe into high school, the hero's journey. And one of the things I kind of teach my kids when we do a narrative, sometimes I'll let that be a writing prompt, is the hero's journey, is that whole call to action. Like, what is going to make them the superhero? So, like you said, with Peter Parker getting the superpowers didn't really change him much to being going towards a superhero. It was when he failed to save Uncle Ben, and then he's like, I'm not going to let this happen to anybody else.
Yeah, because with his selfishness of not stopping the thief, and and then of course the X-Men also introduced here in the 60s, where it's not that they just get powers, they're born with their powers that then develop later in life. And of course we've talked about this all, we won't get into this, but the X-Men are obviously used to represent minorities, and so we also get the fact that because they have powers, they are feared and hated and looked down upon, which was a huge change to what we had seen in the the gold and silver age of comics, where the superhero was just praised and was essentially a god for a lot of people. Here we got the X-Men, that their whole, and again, that their origin, any mutant's origin, is part of that mutant, is part of that character story. Even if you go into like Wolverine, he had the mutant powers, and then because of Weapon X and the experiments they did on him, he becomes what he becomes, and that is part of that character. Deadpool, same thing. If you've seen the movies, you kind of know that part of the reason he is who he is and the character he is because of his origin and comes from his origin. And even going back to the Fantastic Four, one of the early Marvel comics, their origin, them becoming the superpower team that they are, is also the reason why they really kind of live a broken life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's Ben Grimm, who has the challenge, kind of like a mutant does in X-Men, but challenge of being the Thing. You know, Sue having her issues and not feeling like Reed really pays her any attention, which is part of the Invisible. And of course, Reed himself feeling guilty for doing it and trying to figure out a way. I mean, the origins, when Marvel come in, the origins stop being just a prologue to the story, and they start becoming an ongoing emotional engine that drives the story.
And it ties into that character, like you were talking about Fantastic Four. I've always heard of, Reed Richards being stretched too thin. He's trying to do too much. Johnny Storm, the hothead. He's always trying to find adventure. Sue, not being seen. So her powers are literally invisibility. So you definitely get a lot more. Marvel really cranked up the superhero origin story up to 11. They kind of took what DC and the older comics have done. They said, well, what can we add on to this?
And again, I think that this especially goes back into literature, where the source of their powers or what caused them to have their powers drives the story. I mean, I think back to, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You get, which of course the Hulk is essentially a version of that, where Jekyll and Hyde are pretty much in an internal battle, and it's Jekyll trying to control Hyde and what Hyde is doing. But then you've even got characters like the Invisible Man, and what happens when a power corrupts a person who is already flawed. And you get into stuff like that. So I think Marvel really did pull it back into, look, this is what literature does. Like, what drives these characters is what created them. Even to go even more basic, I mean, a story like Tuck Everlasting. When they discover the fountain that gives them their immortality, that then drives what that family chooses to do for the rest of their lives, and how they act and the way they go about their lives. So
it's like the superpower doesn't change you; it more amplifies the person who you already were.
True, but again, it also, like I said, it develops what you then, like, what the rest of your life is like. I mean, and again, I'm focused on Tuck Everlasting right now in my head. It causes them to essentially go into hiding, and they make sure that they're not seen by too many people for too long that would catch on to the fact that they're not aging.
They're trying to hide the secret.
Yeah. So there is, stuff like, I mean, even the immortality thing's kind of popping into my head, but Dorian Gray, he hides away the portrait, and it affects his life, and I could go on to a few others. But so, do you think that when Marvel comes in and they start doing this, that is it an evolution? I think is what I'm getting at here, or is it them returning to something that, like I said, classic literature had already established?
I could see both, but I'll say evolution, because I feel like you have more supernatural, you have more cosmic, kind of superhero origins, like we talked about Fantastic Four being out in space. You have mutations. They're kind of just taking what the comics in the 30s and 40s did and then spicing it up, basically. They're changing up. And kind of like you talked about with the X-Men, sometimes superpowers are not a good thing. They kind of, change the game right there, saying, hey, not everybody who has superpowers is going to be seen as the good guy. So I would definitely say it's kind of an evolution from that kind of, what would you say? That's the Silver Age, the Gold Age there?
Once we're getting into
The Marvel?
not the Marvel. I mean, we're still, there's kind of this is slowly going into the Bronze Age, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'd definitely say there's a shift there for especially those Marvel connections.
And then, of course, by the time we're into the 70s, we start getting the media of television and movies that start coming in. Not that they hadn't already existed. I mean, there had been movie serials of Superman and Captain America and Batman and Captain Marvel, aka Shazam. We had those, but those were pretty much just following the comics. But when we get into the 70s, we start getting, the Incredible Hulk TV show, where we have his origin, and we're reminded of his origin in the opening of every episode.
Every single one.
We get a Wonder Woman TV show where we're not necessarily reminded of her origin, but we are constantly reminded that she is not, human. But then we get into the movies. So we've got Superman 1978, in which we do not see Superman until almost an hour into the movie. So they take their time to develop Krypton, and then into Superman becoming Clark Kent, and Clark Kent developing, kind of understanding what he's like as a teenager. And so we get development there. And I will say that is an exception to what we got in early movies. Because then we get into the 80s, and we get The Punisher with Dolph Lundgren. And again, that's kind of a Batman-like take. His family's murdered. He goes after all of them. And well, I'll just go right into it. We get Batman 89, where Batman 89 jumps in as if you already know Batman's story. It's one of the rare ones that they don't really do the origin.
Do not hold your
hand. They go back to it, and they flash back to it, but they jump right into, he's already Batman, you know the story, let's move on. And then you get into the 90s, and we get a few more. We get Blade, and the same thing. Blade just starts right off. They have to go back and explain his origin. Then we get into the 2000s. We've got the X-Men, which we get a whole exposition at the beginning explaining about the mutant gene. And then you get like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man in 2002 that essentially kind of condenses a whole bunch of development into just minutes of that. Because I've always had a problem with that he graduates from high school like in the beginning of the movie. I think at this point, when you're trying to put these characters who've existed at this time, 40 years, 40 plus years, depending on the character. I think the studios were worried we can't tell an origin story because audience would be bored to see an origin story. Like I said, Superman being the exception. Superman did a good job telling the origin story, but they started to gloss over them. I think they also were like, comic books are just too weird. And so if we can just nullify the weirdness aspect of it and just have the characters, we'll go with that. I think, though, it also took away from the emotional depth of the characters because they wanted the action, the superhero, and they felt like it would slow things down. I don't know why. Superman 78 is the godfather of them all. It still stands as one of the best superhero movies ever made. And like I said, they spent the first 45 minutes to an hour just giving the origin story of Superman.
Yeah, I feel like with Superman, it's different because the question while you were talking, this is a question I asked myself. If I was making the movie, how am I going to make a movie about a guy who's the strongest person in the world and show that he is a good guy? And so you have to spend all that time on character development and showing, he was nurtured by his parents. He was, a good kid from the get-go. Really showing who he is, and then we just add the superpowers on top of that.
So do you think when they then decided to skip or rush the origins, do you think that helped or hurt when it came to the superhero movies?
I feel like with Superman, it kind of hurt because I remember my first big Superman movie was Superman Returns, I believe.
Yeah, but again, that one was essentially a loose sequel to the Christopher Reeve movies.
And it was kind of one of those to me. Like it didn't have the origin story up at the front. But to me, origin story is really tied in with character development. If I don't care about your character at the beginning of the story and who they are as a person, I'm not going to care about them with superpowers.
No, and I 100% agree with that because the next thing in my notes, of course, the next thing we got was when the MCU started in 2008, and Iron Man showed, what you can build character. Mm-hmm. You can let the hero be flawed, which I always have said Marvel is better at that than DC. And you can make the origin just as entertaining without it feeling obligatory, without it just feeling shoot in there. We got to see the development of Tony Stark. We got to see what caused him to become Iron Man. We got to see the development of Iron Man. And even though he does become Iron Man and we see Iron Man, that first Iron Man movie, that entire movie is his origin.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he probably, doesn't wear the actual, the red and gold Iron Man that we know and love until probably, an hour? Almost like Superman. I mean, he has the silver,
maybe,
but two, I think what Iron Man had going for it was he was, to me, a relatively unknown superhero. When you take a superhero that not too many people know, I feel like you can dive a little deeper into the origin story. Like, we've had how many Batman movies where Martha Wayne and, they die in the dark alley almost every single movie. We've seen it over and over. Everybody knows that story.
I have talked about extensively on this show how much I don't need to see the Waynes die again.
And so I feel like, superheroes that you don't know the story, you can dive a little deeper. Like when we did the Blue Beetle episode. I remember Blue Beetle from some cartoons growing up, but watching just the movies origin story had me hooked. They could have spent probably an hour on just Jaime. If you care about, going back to that what I said earlier, if you care about the character, if you care about them before the superpower, you'll care about them afterwards when they get that superpower.
Which again, I think is what Marvel in the MCU has been able to do, because you're looking at, Black Panther. Essentially, we're given a very quick version of his origin in, was it Civil War?
I think so, yeah.
And then it's fleshed out more once we get the actual Black Panther movie. Captain Marvel, they spend a lot of time on Carol and who Carol was, but they do it kind of in flashback, a little bit more so. And so and then the Spider-Man, the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, essentially all three of those movies, Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home, all three of those essentially is his origin story, which blew my mind when we got to the third one, that essentially the way it ends, I'm sitting there going, wait, this is his this has been his entire origin story, like him becoming the Spider-Man that we know. So I think the MCU and a lot of their movies and the way they're doing their storytelling, the origins become less about how their powers came to be or how they became to be a superhero, and more about, like you're saying, who they are and who they are choosing to be.
And that's the thing with especially the media of movies and TV. If your audience is invested in that person and what happens to them, every little decision they make, the audience is going to moan and groan if they do something that they did not like. So I want, which Spider-Man was it? The one where he kind of loses his power and he has the girl take care of him in the apartment.
Yeah, Spider-Man 3.
Okay. Like I remember that movie, and once he kind of becomes a jerk in that movie, people, everybody. I remember after we went and watched it, everybody was like, I did not like that movie because that's not the Spider-Man I know. Like I want him to be the sweet person, like the girl that was taking care of him, like in the way he did that. Like everybody was kind of invested because you had the buildup of 1 and 2, and then all of a sudden the twist with the Venom symbiote. People were really invested in like how Peter Parker had changed.
Do you think though that I know people talk about superhero fatigue and with the movies. Do you think though that we've hit an origin fatigue? Like, do we want to just go ahead and get right into it, and then we'll just discover about the origin bit by bit, little by little? Or do you think audiences want to start off with a full origin and get to know the character?
I honestly think it depends on how it's done. Nobody likes a big exposition dump on you. Just a boring, here's how this guy or this person got their superpowers. But if it's tastefully done and entertaining, yeah, like if your whole first episode or the whole first 30, 40 minutes of a movie is about how they got their powers, that's fine with me. If you want to do it through a series of flashbacks, I know me and you did the Arrow show, and the flashbacks of it when he was on the island and how he went from pretty boy, everything done for him, to how he learned how to shoot a bow and arrow and become a superhero basically. That was very well done as well. So I think it's just.
But again, you are talking about a show though that had 20 something episodes to be doing flashbacks and showing like this is how he developed this ability, or this is why he chooses to do things this way, and you can't really do that in a movie.
No,
that's the thing.
I'll say for flashbacks though, kind of the way Captain Marvel was, I feel like if it ties into the story, that the character kind of learns something, tied in with their origin that helps them in the end, that's a great way. But if they don't need anything from their origin story to help them win the battle at the end, then go ahead and put it in the beginning.
Yeah. So let me get into this. So they make a movie like Joker with Joaquin Phoenix, and Chad and I discussed this back when we saw the movie. We don't know if a character like the Joker really needs an origin. Like it really kind of helps that we don't know why he is the way he is or where he comes from. So do you think there is a point where the origin story stops being necessary?
Yeah, I mean, for certain characters, I would agree. Like, I felt like the Joker origin story was unnecessary. When you have a beloved villain, a beloved superhero that you don't really need to know why they are the way they are, then yeah, you can, having an origin story can kind of ruin the way you perceive them. If you know Joker's the way he is because of some medicine he took, that kind of ruins the fun of why is he the way he is.
But can you think of another character that if they were to do a movie and just jump straight in, that they already have their powers, they're already an established, hero or even villain, that the audience would be okay with not having any type of an origin?
I mean, honestly, I feel like you could do, once again, your big three from DC: Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. I mean, honestly, your Avengers, anybody, like you said, who's well established. Honestly, in my opinion, I don't think you need an origin story. You can just go straight in.
But there's going to be the audience out there that does not know these characters, that does not know where they come from. Because even when you look at Superman 25 that just came out this year, they still roughly gave an origin.
through text.
Yeah, well, but also through him watching the video of his parents and kind of explaining all of that. Like they still kind of I get, again, like I will say, Batman, I don't think we need it. I think you could almost just have the line in there, his parents were murdered, he became Batman. We don't need to see it. We don't need the story told to us every time. I don't know. Spider-Man, they kind of did it. They barely, like, we really did not get the Tom Holland Spider-Man origin. They just, again, they talk about he was bitten by a radioactive spider, but we don't see it. So
yeah, I think it's just a fine line, especially with movies. I'll say, especially with movies, it's a fine line of, you want to bring in new people. You got to have enough origin story, some backstory to kind of say, this is why our hero is the way they are. This is how they got their powers and everything. But you don't want to exclude the people who've been watching for 20 years. Like with the new superhero, Superman movie this year. You've loved all of them. You'd probably, when you heard there was a new Superman movie, you'd probably thinking, well, I hope they don't do an origin story, because I've been watching them since I was little. But somebody who's never, and that's just the problem, is you have people who probably need to hear the origin story and people who don't. And you have to kind of just seesaw that line.
Yeah, and again, I do think that's part of the evolution, is not only are we evolving the way heroes get their powers and the origins themselves, going more from, oh, it's an alien that came to Earth, or, oh, it's, his parents died, and so he's going to fight for good, or, oh, a science experiment went wrong. When Marvel comes in, they start making it a little bit more personal, and a little bit more psychological and all. And I think that even some of the other characters have been developed even more. You look back at even this Superman, the Superman 2025, and spoilers if you haven't seen it, but you get into, oh, wait, there's a slight twist to his origin story. He was apparently sent to Earth to conquer Earth, which is something that, there have been stories that have kind of done that, but that's not our main story origin for Superman. He was just sent to Earth to save him from from Krypton being about to explode. And so, I think that now we've got origin stories that are, like I said, more psychological, more personal. They, as with the X-Men and some other characters, they're cultural reflections of the time. But I still think from the very beginning, even into today, they are commentaries on trauma, on power, on responsibility. But they have evolved the same way, we evolve as society. So whether we're watching a hero get their powers for the first time, watching them wrestle with what their powers cost them, it all comes back to, what do you do with a moment that changes your life forever? And I think that's what the superhero origin story is ultimately doing. And I think it has developed over the years, because I think we need that. And I think, going back to Superman 25, I think that is a very big part of that, because it shows, yes, he was sent to Earth because his planet was exploding, and yes, the intention was for him to conquer Earth, but because of the Kents and the way he was raised and the way he was brought up and all of that, that developed him into who he is and how he then deals with the stuff that he deals with. And I think that was a great one. So any final thoughts you have, Justin, before we wrap this up?
Oh, one I was thinking of while you were talking was Doctor Strange. And you were talking about the trauma and, him going from being a doctor, a surgeon, and, what gets in the car wreck, and now he can't perform surgery. So he has to go on this journey. And I mean, what, probably the first half of the movie is his literal origin story, him just trying to solve a problem.
Yeah.
And like we've talked about, if it's tastefully done, it's a character that you're interested in. And it's like you said, it's how they handle, it's their reaction to the trauma. What are they going to do? And honestly, to me, like, Doctor Strange was not really the best of a person, but kind of he learned to, especially once he kind of got the powers and people, the mentor figures, especially kind of going back to the hero's journey, he had that mentor figure for him to kind of shape him into who he was eventually, meant to be.
Yeah. No, that's some great ones. I mean, as you're talking, I'm even thinking about the way MCU, and I mean, it was in the comics as well, but the way, like, Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, not only do you have the fact that she is a mutant and she's had to deal with that, but just focusing on the MCU right now, the way she's, honestly, she's had various origin stories. Mm-hmm. Like, you get the Age of Ultron introduction to her and that development of the character as you get into the next Marvel, the Avengers movie, where, okay, now she's got this relationship and she's in a better place, a better headspace. Then you get the death of Vision and how that changes her and how she deals with that. And then you get into the show WandaVision and the outcome of that, which leads into Multiverse of Madness and how she's dealing with it. And it's just a constant, like, this trauma is happening to her. How does she handle it? This trauma's now happened to her. How is she handling that? And her origin story is multi-leveled, which is, again, something that I think a good storytelling is going to do. It's not just how did you handle this one event, but how do you handle other events that come along?
Yeah. It's that domino
like
effect.
you said, it's more about how is the hero going to deal with this outcome, which, going into Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, that Dark Knight trilogy, it's a very similar case. It's not just about him now being the Dark Knight and the, going after vengeance and all, but it's then how does he deal with these circumstances, and what happens when all of a sudden he finds out in the first movie that the person who mentored him is actually now the villain. What happens in the second one when he's got to choose, like, he's got this anarchist that he's having to deal with in the Joker, and how does this go against what he is and what he has stood for? And then even into the third movie, where he has to decide, in order to continue to save the city that he is trying to protect, he has to become the villain. Mm-hmm. And again, it's a constant build. It's no longer just this is their origin and that is everything. It's now, okay, here's the origin, but here is, again, this is that evolution of the origin. Here is how that is going to continually affect their decisions later, and how decisions they make later is then going to affect the character moving forward.
There's all cause and effect, and when your world is turned upside down, what are you going to choose?
But we'll go ahead and wrap this up for this little one-shot. And thank you, Justin, for this really in-depth conversation about the origin of superheroes.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Rate and review the show. Before today, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.